We are ready to go on to our next speaker, I think. TJ is bringing up our duet fireside chat from Vrbo. So we have Tania and Richard. Are they ready to go? Hey, there's Tania. Hey, how's it going?
Hey, good, thanks.
Where's Richard?
He should be joining too. I think he just has to accept.
So, you know what? Since we just got off with Lily Ray, why don't we talk about how VRBO is doing during the COVID crisis, as it were? If you can allude to some of those data points, of course.
Yeah, no, great. That's actually the intro that I was going to do anyway, so that's perfect. So while we wait for Richard, because we don't have slides today, we're going to do a fireside chat. And so we're going to kind of just talk through some things. But I'm Tania Shershin. I am coming to you from Austin, Texas. And the Vrbo business has been an interesting one. So for when COVID hit, most of the Vrbo business was focused on cancellation. So if you're not familiar with Vrbo, we are the travel vacation rental marketplace. We are part of Expedia Group. And so there was definitely a lot of cancellations coming through, and that was our main focus when COVID hit. And we were managing the issues across all of our customers. So we have three main types of customers, obviously travelers who wanted to get out of their trips. We also have vacation rental owners. Some of them rely on this income to pay their mortgages. And then we have property managers, many of which were going to need to lay off employees or potentially even close their business as a result of the pandemic. So it really hit us hard when COVID first hit. And there's Richard. Hi, Richard.
There he is. We found him.
So on the marketing side at Vrbo, we paused all of our paid marketing, including search. And so just like many others in various industries, we had a dramatic decrease in demand. And I think all of us kind of went through phases of shock and adjustment. And I just want to call out that during this rather stressful time at work, I was reminded that I was indeed in the right line of work with the right people, because it was a lot of search marketers laughing at things like seeing the Google surge in how to cut your own hair and how to cut my kids' hair. I mean, when I saw that, I just started laughing so hard, and especially with how tense everything was, it's just nice to find humor and kind of search volumes for these types of things. And it was just funny because at my house, this meant that my husband was attempting mohawks and mullets on himself and my 2-year-old. So you can imagine what that was like at my house. But after that initial adjustment, we were back at doing what we do best. So we were thinking about our customers and how to reach potential new customers. And so we started brainstorming content that would be relevant for customers when they were in the lockdown and for when restrictions would start to lift, what people would be thinking about as it relates to travel. We even, during this time, kicked off a crowdsourcing initiative. It was a small internet contest in which we engaged our employee base to write articles that basically we thought would have some really good traction during the time. And so from all over the world, we had employees start writing articles ranging from the top 10 Netflix movies to watch with your family, because Vrbo is very emphasis on family travelers, to things like the top family-friendly vacation rentals with free cancellation, which obviously because of cancellation was big in terms of what people wanted as well. And so people were writing these articles, and it was a really good way also just to keep engagement during a time when, again, it was a little bit hard on our industry in particular. And so then after a couple months, and as lockdowns lifted, we started to see some recovery, particularly in the vacation rental space. So the rest of travel is still kind of rebounding and recovering, but vacation rentals led that recovery. And so people wanted to get out of the home they had been stuck in for a long time. They just wanted to drive somewhere that they could enjoy with a small circle of family and friends. They perhaps wanted to stay in a place with some privacy, so maybe not wanting to go to a big resort. Vacation rental homes happen to be kind of the perfect fit for that. And so we have seen some recovery in our business. And so now we're in this new normal. And so to kind of help paint a picture of what this journey looked like, so I'm talking about the overall kind of travel and overall Vrbo business. I am going, now that Richard has joined us and is our SEO expert, I was going to ask him a few questions to kind of paint that picture of what the journey looked like and also kind of where we're at today as it relates to search and SEO. So let's get to it. So I talked a little bit about how travel was impacted, still recovering. Richard, can you talk a little bit about how search behavior changed during this time?
Sure. So, nothing major, only, wholesale changes to, the search demand and the intent behind all of that. So I think just in general, the assumption is that everything changed, which is quite exciting. Initially, not so much. But it's when we start to see the different search behavior and things coming through to the site, I think some of the initial trends. So it's I guess the first trend is that less people are booking in terms of the demand does drop, right at the start, which I think had everybody in the travel sector a little bit nervous to start with. But then as the months go on and we start to get a better handle on what's happening and what the new intent is from people who are looking to travel, is that there is a big shift in pent-up demand, especially for North America, as we've all been locked down and we're all desperate to go on holiday. And I think despite everything that's happened, I think the need for us to get away and spend good quality family time together is more important than ever. So we did see a huge spike come as some of the lockdowns were lifted. So that was interesting to see. But I think the biggest challenge for us was that the search demand has shifted. So, we're an international travel company, and a lot of the searches for the US will be to, exciting international destinations. And that of course, has completely contracted. So that demand is now very much internally domestic travel within the US, and then potentially within driving distance of, your local city or a hub or something like that. So that was a big shift because as a website, we're focused on all the international destinations. And then all of a sudden, that list becomes a lot smaller. And then, of course, you've got people exploring things like staycations and looking at different ways that they can travel and work away remotely. I think I've definitely thought about that myself in terms of it would be nice to look at some different walls for a couple of months and work somewhere else. So we saw staycations and things increase. And then also, I guess, so that talks to the demand, but then around the intent itself, we're starting to see interest and a lot of questions being raised around cleanliness and Wi-Fi and some of the amenities that had never really, I guess they were always there in the background, but not to the extent that they were. So how do we surface that content and those needs and try and get that on there? So nothing too major, just wholesale changes across the board.
I like that. Nothing's changed. Oh, actually, everything's changed. Yeah, that's awesome. And because everything has changed, when you think back to the start of the year, Richard, can you share what your plans look like when you were thinking about the SEO team and what you guys wanted to accomplish? How did your plans change, and what actually didn't change at all in terms of your plans?
So short answer is everything changed. But it's so I think at the start of the year, I think, and travel, like a lot of verticals, it's in my mind, everyone was going to go on holidays to Florida for the next 10 years. And that was always going to be the case. And we knew what we there are trending areas and things, but we had a rough handle on, this is our world. And this is, ideally we want to achieve #1 rankings in the following destinations and places and types of holidays. And we were geared up to work that way. What we weren't really expecting was the shift in demand, which is particularly traumatic for SEO because we're not known for being the quickest to move. So it's we like to say that things will take time. And that's because they do to a degree. If we want to start to rank for different content, we've got to get new content up and live on the site. So I think for us, there's 3 key areas that we were impacted by. So the content that we have on the site. So making sure we're surfing the right content. And we're talking to the new destinations that people are looking for. Then I guess from a technical perspective, we've reprioritized all of our destinations and holiday types. So all of a sudden, I guess sort of road trips are far more important than they ever were. But we have to sort of show Google that we now think this is important. So our internal linking structure has to change to reflect this. So it's sort of changing our internal linking structure to represent these new priorities. And then there's a third piece, which is indexation. So we're a very big website covering lots of different travel areas. Some of these travel areas are not important to us anymore and perhaps won't be for the foreseeable future. So it's like, how do we remove this content from our site and start to prioritize the rest? So it's sort of, I guess, new content, reworking our entire internal linking and indexation, and which is, I guess, fine, but perhaps something that we'd never had to do quite so quickly in the past.
That's really awesome. The thing that you made me think of as you're talking about about road trips and kind of the content that we started to develop there. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just because that was one of the major shifts that we saw, is that obviously because of the way things started to open up, people weren't, flying to where they needed to go. It was this increase in road trips. Kind of what was the process by which we started to come up with what would be the right content for us to start surfacing around road trips?
Yeah, so I think I guess the problem with search demand data in general is that it's very good at telling us sort of what happened this time last year, and this didn't fortunately happen before. So sort of for us, it is very much a combination of using the search demand plus sort of the internal signals that we're seeing from a business in terms of sort of like from a retail perspective, where people are booking, and then and where they're based, and then starting to use that to inform the trends, because it's sort of, we needed to get ahead of what was happening in the search space as quickly as we could to sort of build out those local destinations. So sort of, I think one of the things we've got better at doing is, because I think when this whole pandemic started, I think the first thing we did is panic a little bit, because we didn't have enough data to make any real decisions until we, and I think we had to look at what was happening in the business as quickly as possible, and then start to sort of build out the search data to sort of supplement that.
Yeah, makes sense. So we talked a lot about SEO and kind of the impacts there and what you had to kind of transition and shift. But maybe we should take a step back and talk a little bit about the overall search marketplace and how the entire marketplace kind of changed during this time. You want to talk? Let's start talking about that a little bit.
Sure. So I think it was the biggest PPC SEO test in existence to happen. So sort of, SEO in travel. So we have hotel ads, the organic listing, and then the SEM and paid search ads. So sort of historically, we've all been fighting for space, and the SEM auction over, the last sort of 10, 15 years has really took off. It's sort of, that there's been, inflation, year on year as people sort of compete in that space. And then all of a sudden, everything stopped, and the paid search ads came off. Everyone was sort of pulling back their investment, and then there was just organic search, and it not just for us, but for a lot of people in the space. We did see Google kept some hotel ads or the vacation rentals in our space live in certain areas, but still it was just us, and that was really interesting to see what that looked like. So sort of all of a sudden, the organic share sort of click-through rate just sort of went through the roof. And then I think something that was interesting at the time, and then I think the $1 million question for us is sort of like looking at this: how much of, has there been any cannibalization in the past between paid search and SEO? And is this the right time to sort of look at it? And it's sort of, how much of this is down to the pandemic and how much of this is down to sort of SEM being off? So sort of, we're trying to sort of, I think not just us, but I imagine a lot of people in the industry and in sort of similar affected areas are trying to unpick what that looks like. But I think the overall thought, and I imagine everyone is sort of, obviously we all love Google, and we all, it's a great service, a great platform, but they're doing okay financially. And if we can avoid potentially sort of, piling more money into the auction, then I think that's probably no bad thing. So I think there's just sort of, I think we're all taking this slightly more cautious approach to sort of how we're sort of working. And obviously I'm slightly biased, but I'd want SEO to lead in this.
Well, let's be clear though. Google definitely wants us to enter, and in big ways, back into the auction, I'm sure. Yeah, I think, and the only thing I'd add there is, I think that there were so many shifts that did happen with the pandemic. A lot of businesses forced to go online, and it almost became in this space for us like this giant also test to see what happens when you turn off things. And then, I mean, to your point though, you don't know how much of it is because you turned off SEM or because of the actual state of affairs. And so I know that as we look to the future, I think we're constantly thinking about different ways that we can test to see what the impacts of cannibalization, et cetera, on SEO are. I think that's a big one for us. We really want to learn more about that as we continue to invest in SEO and continue to invest in our strategy there. Great. Let's talk a little bit about the lessons learned, because I think that's the main point kind of our chat today and what we wanted people to take away with. And so I figured that we'd want to spend the most time about kind of the lessons that we've learned. And, I know you said everything changed, but it's kind of like if we were to map out, and if we did have slides today, maybe we would have had this like takeaway slide that would have said, here's what we learned, and here's kind of what you would take away. Maybe we can kind of just hash it out and see what we can come up with, and we can always post it out later.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I think there's sort of two things that sort of really come to mind. It's sort of I think the intent has changed. So it's sort of, I thought, Lily's presentation earlier was super interesting in terms of sort of like who the winners and losers in the space. And I think it's sort of the algorithm is sort of remained, for us, we've seen very little fluctuation. I think Google's been busy and it's done a lot of good work in sort of, the COVID space. But I think the algorithm has stayed reasonably steady in the grand scheme of things, but the intent has dramatically changed. So it's like, how do we answer that intent? And it's sort of, for us, it's all that messaging and the content. And it's sort of really, at a really simple level, Google wants to rank the best website first, but best has changed because the intent has changed. So now I think best looks like being able to answer the needs and concerns of travelers, which is around sort of cleanliness and, really perhaps moving to sort of like, slightly more remote locations and having more outdoor space and really trying to understand what that looks like. And I think if we can answer those needs, that will be reflected in the click-through rate and the behavior that we're seeing. So it's sort of, we've got to sort of surface that as a business and try and get that content there, which obviously, we're working across quite a few different sort of markets and locations, and there are different rules and regulations in all of those areas. And that intent looks slightly different for all those different sort of different countries going through different stages. So sort of that's quite a big change for us. I think the other thing that I wanted to talk to was the search demand changing. So it's sort of, I think it's easy to say, but it's hard to really sort of actually change the way your site operates. And I think one of the things we've learned is that in the past, perhaps we've been guilty of sort of doing research around what demand looks like in a sort of a quite an ad hoc way. So we would sort of do some research and we would develop some content, and there would be, a 3-month window between doing that and getting that content live. And then all of a sudden we found that, it's not just that we've seen a trend in glamping in the UK and we're going to create some content. It's just we've seen wholesale changes. So it's like, how do we move content creation and sort of changes in search demand from being 3 months away to sort of being like, weeks apart. So I think it's automating that process that hadn't sort of needed to be automated before, and sort of making sure we can pull all of that data to sort of respond a lot quicker. So I think for us, like from a practical perspective, it means structuring our keyword research in a database and sort of having it sort of programmatically broken down in a way that we can sort of directly link a search term and a destination and any amenities and things associated with that, and then sort of understand exactly what piece of content needs to be served to that, and then be able to, and then I guess understanding that could well change in the future. I mean, it's sort of so understanding that demand perhaps didn't change that much in the past, but demand changing and shifting is going to be the new norm. So sort of putting those processes in place, was really important for us, and took a little bit of, a few hours of time to sort of try and get that right.
Yeah, I can imagine. So then I remember. So I like those two, and let's try to just unpack them a little bit. So the first one is the actual like customer intent, our traveler intent changing, and what they're looking for. And I like what you said there about like it's actually the definition of how Google is saying what is best has changed. What kind of signals were you using? Were you and the team using to see how the intent had really changed, and then how did you then act on that?
So I think I guess there's a little bit of a lag, and there's a bit of testing, and there's a bit of an assumption around, I think, looking to what behavior we're seeing in the market, in the news, and things like that. Because I think it's sort of, we weren't necessarily seeing that sort of that search demand change immediately. And also, I think as the world is coming to terms with what this means, I think we were following the news with everyone else. And as a travel company, a lot of people, and this isn't particularly scientific, who want to go away on holiday, trying to figure out what it is that we were looking for and needing. So I think to be honest, we looked back into the business that sort of really knows travel, and sort of they sort of, shared, the understanding around sort of cleanliness and the standards and the Wi-Fi that I think sort of they just floated to the top so quickly that those were the things that we started to sort of add in and include in the content right at the start, and try and address, I guess it's sort of, you want to address what are really those main concerns before you then start, I guess, ideally you want to move on to selling the holiday and the vacation and the benefits of that after you've addressed the concerns.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And then on the second item, as it relates to kind of changing demand and kind of becoming more flexible, I think that really resonates well with me, because we had to do that across a lot of areas of our business, right? Where we had to identify ways that we can become more flexible, because actually, as we know, like just in the last few days, we've started to see things in Europe, increased cases, more lockdowns again. And so this is far from over, right? Like we are continuously learning across all these different markets. When you think about that need for more flexibility, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges to that? Is it kind of organizational structure? Let's talk a little bit about that.
So I think for us, it's the internal linking structure of the website. So sort of, it's not just that the demand has changed, that there are new territories. It's that what was our top 1,000 destinations for people to travel is now different. And it's sort of, we would always promote Florida and Pigeon Forge from the homepage, the US website, and that was a given, and we almost didn't even have to sort of question that was the right thing to do. But now all of a sudden that's not necessarily the case. Well, perhaps for the top destinations it is, but when you start to sort of move down, then things have moved completely. So sort of, how do we do that not just across the US website, but across all of the different countries, and understanding that in France that they can't travel to Germany, but so all of those destinations are no longer viable or within sort of driving distance. So it's sort of being able to add that logic. So it's sort of, I think we had to sort of get our data, our keyword research and things organized so we could start to apply the business logic on top, which was never really needed. So it's sort of, a lot of this isn't just search data. It's putting search data in a place that means we can also then apply business logic to search data that can then sort of inform which destinations we link off to, and then also be able to do that programmatically, because there's a lot of destinations across an awful lot of markets that we need to be able to sort of manage.
Great. And I think that probably gets us to all the content we had today. Should we cut over to questions? And do you want me to moderate, or would anybody like to moderate for us?
Well, we're fully prepared for this.
Mostly prepared. How about that? Yeah, we do have a couple questions. Come go ahead and read them out, and you fill them however you see fit.
Sure.
The first one actually comes in from Frank. So he was asking that, there's some companies now that specifically do optimization of the rental sites. So he was curious, how do you differentiate yourself from like Airbnb or whomever that has a similar base, because of the info for the same listings might be what on your side as well as someone else's. Like, how do you differentiate it when the companies are doing optimization for rental sites for VRBO?
Richard, do you want to start on the organic piece?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question. I think it's something that the travel industry struggles with because not just rental, we all have not dissimilar inventory. So sort of how do you sort of show sort of unique content in that space? So sort of when you could potentially have the same property listed on multiple websites. So I think I guess there's a couple of things. One is I think the brand positioning. I think it's sort of we are family friendly and family first, and that is very much how we curate our listings and describe them and the content that sits around them. I think also we're very conscious of the fact that we need to keep things as unique as possible to avoid any sort of duplication on that side. So it's sort of there was a second point that I forgot. Now that I said there's two things, maybe
we'll get back to it. Don't worry.
Well, actually, it kind of does bring up one of the questions that I had, and I was thinking about just COVID as a whole and the train wreck that it was. Did it actually end up creating like an inherent opportunity for VRBO going forward with all the economic instability? Like, did it change any mindsets? I don't know, that you could see in your data where people are now more open to doing this for like side income, or no?
Oh, I see what you're saying on the homeowner and property.
Yeah, that side of it.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen a major shift there. Meaning, I think there might have been a little bit of increase of people wanting to but I think for the most part, because our inventory is so heavy on second home inventory, I think a lot of people had already considered this. And then, Airbnb tends to be a lot stronger, let's say, in urban destinations, and they have not had as much probably of a surge in those areas. And so I'd say that on the homeowner side, we haven't seen as much of people moving to wanting to rent more. But the intent shift is the big one that Richard was talking about, which is, as travelers, I think people in the past would have just kind of gone to the default of, okay, I'm just going to stay at the same hotel or resort that I love to go with my family to. And so from that perspective, I think that when they started to do searches, I think they were starting to say, okay, I need to go somewhere that's close by. So I need to do a search for, a destination that's close to me as opposed to something I would have done in the past. And so, and then that's when some of our content started to surface, right? Like we have like vacation homes in driving distance to a lot of the main cities. And so a lot of people started to notice that vacation rentals would be a good way for them to vacation. And I'd say that I don't want to call it an opportunity. I would say that shift has definitely, we've seen it more on our part of the business than the rest of Expedia Group. I know Expedia just did our earnings call not too long ago. And that was one of the takeaways, was that Vrbo was recovering a lot faster than the other areas that were other areas like hotels.com and other areas of Expedia Group. And so I would say that shift is a big one on the traveler side, maybe a little bit less on the homeowner side.
Did the shift also end up shaking out like weaker competitors too? Like, obviously you and Airbnb, you're going to be around for a while, but I know there's like little tinier outfits. Like, do they just disappear? Like, are you now eating their lunch or?
Well, here's an interesting thing too, that actually, I don't know if it's because Facebook is listening. I hate that, but I just saw an ad for Sonder, and one of the things that they're shifting to, and actually one of the questions that I had for you guys is like, it seems that some of these smaller ones are starting to shift to like work from a new home or something, like change your office or whatever. You're basically using a VRBO type service to facilitate getting out of your current situation and like going to another property and starting to work from there. So I'm wondering, is that the same kind of shift that you guys are seeing, and are you targeting that, or are you kind of like letting them, feed that market, knowing that you're focusing on families and stuff?
I'll start, and then Richard, if you want to add on. I do think that's an interesting positioning, only because even though we're family friendly, especially when kids started to, now that we know that some schools aren't even reopening and that kids are working, kids are doing home from school from home, and then you've got a lot of people who can work from home. There was this idea of like a workcation or staycation. I think we referred to them as staycations, but it's this idea that instead of it being everybody traveling right at fall break and right around like the holidays, it started to open up where we're seeing, okay, people are traveling and staying full weeks, at times that they normally couldn't do that. Right. So I can definitely see why a lot of other companies are starting to gravitate towards that positioning. And we are more emphasizing kind of just, togetherness. And so even if it means that you now can take a break where you can work from home for maybe, from anywhere, not from your home, but from a vacation rental for a portion of it, and then maybe vacation after, so that you can kind of have that experience with your family. I think that's where we're trying to be most emphatic about. Yeah, Richard, is there anything on the search side that you wanted to add there?
Yeah, so I think just that like Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi speeds, and I think that's sort of reassurance that when you get there that it's actually going to work to the level. I think sort of is all showing that intent, with that sort of ability to work, you work from anywhere. And I think we all understand it's not just search behavior, but a change of scenery can do us all a bit of good. So it's sort of definitely starting to see that come through.
And then the follow-up question to that too is like, obviously with people being fearful of COVID and the virus and spreading it, are you seeing that everyone is just completely more conscious about, do I go to the VRBO? Do they have the special like COVID cleaning crew or I think that people are going to be apprehensive about staying in a place where they're not sure, like, when was the last person that rented this and how long did they stay, and did they have COVID? Like, how are you guys, like, content wise or maybe even ranking wise, dealing with those potential items?
So I think in terms of the the property listings themselves, so I think there is a conversation because each property is run by a separate owner, and they all have so they are in contact with people. So sort of I think there is I think it's a slightly different platform to others where it's almost a little bit of a marketplace. You go and you sort of connect with the owner and you have that conversation. So I think that can provide a certain degree of reassurance. But I think it's important for us to sort of pull out right at the start, in terms of messaging and sort of flagging what's important around sort of cleanliness. And, I think it's, you've got concerns around cleanliness and Wi-Fi, I think seems is important. But then I think there's also other elements that people talk to around, like, if things are closed in that area, are there things for me to do? I don't want to go to the local nightclub. What else is there for me to do? So there's a lot of sort of making sure that there is interesting stuff available and open, as well. So people are looking at, making sure they can have a sort of a safe time, not just in the apartment, but like around in the area as well.
Yeah, I would imagine too, like with Phoenix in particular, like there's nothing to do in the summertime. Everything's indoors. So we're probably not getting too many visitors. That's probably going to change very soon.
So I know GMB fairly recently started allowing for tagging on, does the staff wear masks, all the safety mechanisms. Are you utilizing any of that, for the actual listings?
We don't pull any of the Google business data through, just because we have our own system where we sort of have all the different listings, and we wouldn't necessarily want to confuse the two. But I think it's sort of trying to pull as much of that information through to these pages is sort of a key focus for the business. Gotcha.
I guess my final question has to do with 2021, and it's a question I like to ask a lot of companies. This year is like, what happens? Like, I know there's so much ambiguity. Like, no one really knows, but obviously, because your segment's recovering faster than a lot of the rest of the core business, what does it look like for you? Are you guys lining it up for, we're going to be aggressive, we're going to be going after X, Y, Z, and taking share of the market? Are there expectations at the company level in terms of, like, are floodgates going to open, or are people going to dip their toes in
Well, I think even a better kind of deeper point to that too, Joe, is like, there's two kind of pathways that they could take. The vaccine comes out, everyone starts to get better, and things kind of go back to normal, or the vaccine gets delayed, we're still in a COVID environment, like then we have to take this other path. Like how do we continue, right? And I guess maybe you guys have to have that contingency plan of like, well, it could go one of these 2 or 3 different ways, and here's the preparation for that. Like, are you guys actively searching out what those answers would be?
Yeah, I'll start. I think that you're right. There is a lot of ambiguity. Like I mentioned, what we're seeing in Europe has definitely, and that's just been in the last few days, right? That has taken us all by a little bit of surprise, because I think Germany in particular was kind of noted as the example of, what they did to manage the COVID crisis. And now, and now that's even starting to shift a little bit. And so I think that we are making plans to really kind of accelerate what we're doing with the Vrbo brand globally. So not just in the US, but, around the world. But I think we're doing it a little bit tentatively. So things that we might have, been able to lock in, we might be looking into more like programmatic options, things like that we might be able to be more flexible on, so that we can turn things off if needed. I think that's a lot of what we're doing. And then I'd say that when you think about kind of the different areas that we want to focus on, there's really, I don't think that customer behavior shift once now people have an idea of what they can get, from a vacation rental, which is privacy, which is kind of this, home away from home, but you can get to quickly. Now that they've experienced that, I think that trend's going to continue. So I think we're pretty bullish on continuing to see good results. So we're gonna try to lean into that. Richard, is there anything you want to add there?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think from the SEO side, just because we can be a little bit slower to sort of make changes, I think we are sort of planning for perhaps more domestic travel in the near term, with the option of sort of being able to add in international travel. But I think it's sort of trying to dominate domestic and sort of really get our get a grip on that is our top priority. And then it's a vaccine comes in, that's great. Let's look at opening up international destinations. It's a nice problem to have.
Also true. Do you see like your guys' competition kind of matching what you guys are doing, or are they going into like a different direction? Like, is Airbnb taking a totally different route than you guys, or are you all kind of like taking that same sort of pathway?
From an organic search perspective, I think Airbnb are. I guess I can only talk about what I sort of see in the search results.
Speculate.
But they can sort of, they have a, they have a slight. I mean, I know we play in a similar space, but I think, and I know people like to sort of bundle us together, but I do think we're quite different. I think Airbnb is very sort of focused on sort of the, the cities and the sort of the very built-up areas, and we are sort of more family vacation. So it's sort of, I think, maybe more luck than judgment, but I think we're quite well placed in terms of where we are. So we're just sort of heading in our direction. I think it's perhaps maybe more up to them to sort of pivot closer to what we're doing. But I think at the moment, which is a big pivot, but it's not something we've necessarily seen in the short term from an SEO perspective, at least.
Interesting. Yeah, one of the things that we noticed here, especially in Phoenix, we have Flagstaff that's about 2 hours away from us, and personally, I just wanted to get out with the kids, and the one thing that we noticed was like everything was booked. I mean, it was insane the amount of like nothingness that was out there for vacation rentals, and it was on every platform: Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway. They were all just completely just booked. So, I mean, I guess it's great for you in some cases, like where there's a major city and then there's like a resort town or something that's very close. And then people are just like, yeah, I'm going to stay there for a month. Like, I don't care. I'm not going to work. The kids are out of school. And then you have like these other locations where that's just not necessarily feasible. So it is interesting that there's that dichotomy between people wanting to leave and the ability to leave, and then obviously trying to fill all of that stuff in as well. So just really interesting stuff. It's kind of fun and entertaining to watch, although I'm sure it screws with you guys a little bit as well. So not always the most fun thing to have to go through this, but things happen. So, well, thank you both for taking the time with us today. We really appreciate it. If anyone has any further questions for the VRBO team, please reach out to them. You can do that either in the chat or you can ask a question and they'll be able to answer that later on. But thank you, both of you guys, for coming in today. Richard, I know that you're in the UK, so I'm sure you're just like, it's time to party. We gotta go. So we'll let you guys go. But thank you again, both of you. We really appreciate it. And again, if you have any follow-up questions for Tania or Richard, please reach out to them or just put it in chat. So thanks, guys. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Bye.
Yep.